So welcome to Enhancement Circle, and this episode is about Aristotle, and in particular we're looking at Aristotle's Poetics. And we just heard a marvelous presentation, but we didn't tape it, so maybe another time. All right, so there's 6 elements in the Poetics that define narrative, and they're arranged hierarchically. So Aristotle says the most important of them is the plot. And the plot is complicating through the acts, and there's an unraveling in the plot. And he says it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you ever read any of my writing, I say most of life doesn't have a beginning, middle, or an end. It just starts in the middle. So he said the second thing that's important is characters. So developing the characters, their emotional intent, and so the audience relates to the characters. Third would be the discourse or diction. So what they're saying back and forth to each other. The dialogue would be another term to use. Fourth is the thought or theme or purpose. So I think purpose is a little bit easier to understand, but the general thought theme that's going through the Poetics. Number 4, let's see. So we had plot, we had characters, we had diction, we had purpose or theme. So after that is kind of the rhythm, the songs, sort of the melody is another term that you'll find in Aristotle. And he says the least important of all is the spectacle. It's the costuming and clapping of the thunder and whatnot. Now, the thing of it is that hierarchy doesn't work anymore in American TV and movies because the plot is not as important. If you're in where Betty is in France, they still got plots in their films, right? And the plots unfold, etc. And the characters are developed. But a lot of American action movies in particular are all spectacles, cars blowing up, wrecks, one sudden event after another, and it's the costuming takes precedence over anything else. So that's kind of a little bit of introduction to that. Now, Kenneth Burke is well known for developing Aristotle, and really, I don't think he developed it that much. I'm not a real Kenneth Burke fan. He kind of just relabels everything, and he collapses a couple of elements. So he calls the plot, the act, the characters of the actor, right? The spectacle is the scene, etc. So he has a scene-act ratio, etc., etc. Very popular book. Was not a fan of Marx. Was very critical of that. So, but what you have to give Aristotle credit for is 2.5 centuries of fixation on the beginning, middle, end plot and the particular hierarchical components of what constitutes narrative. So my own work, I kind of move away from that quite a bit, and I hope you will appreciate that I try to do something quite a bit different. Let's see if I can find some of my notes. Here they are. All right. So what I'm interested in looking at here, so mimesis is a kind of a mirror. Paul Ricoeur develops the mimesis moments, the 3 mimesis moments, building on Aristotle. The first one is kind of the pre-story, like the things that are not all pinned down by plot, character, theme, the rest of it. So they're kind of the antecedents. And the second mimesis is the emplotment or the plotting that happens, whether that's a beginning, middle, end, or starting in the middle, or unfolding, not unfolding, or a very complex plot. Usually organizations, by the way, don't have one plot unless they got a really dominant leader or real strong past, like Walmart. They have a lot of different plots in a lot of their different operations. But let's just take the third mimesis, is what gets fixated in the culture of, for example, an organization or society, and it becomes the symbols and things that are necessary to communicate and talk before you can go and back to the first mimesis, second mimesis, third mimesis, forms a cycle, or it's a Heideggerian circle, they call it, the hermeneutic circle. You don't care about hermeneutic circle, people do, but I happen to think it's a spiral. So it's interesting that when we look at the characterization step we've been talking about in coaching, tragedy is an imitation, a mimesis of the action that is serious, complete in a certain magnitude, quoting from Aristotle, through pity and fear affecting the proper purgation of these emotions, or in other words, catharsis. Mythos, kind of the mythology, the mythos of it, relates well to the restoring process that we've been looking at in other sessions. So the plot, or mythos, is another word for plot in Aristotle, part 7, must be whole with a beginning, middle, and end. So I'm not making this up. He actually says this in part 7. Ethos and the character of leadership. There's a relationship here. Aristotle says character determines men's qualities. Now we should make it men and women's qualities and all things between. But it is by their actions they are happy or the reverse. So that's in part 8 of Poetics. So ethos refers not to character as an individual personality, but the moral disposition, or the ethos revealed in the actions and choices of characters. So I think this adds quite a lot to it. Now, most of the book is about tragedy, but there was another book that supposedly was written and lost. It was about comedy. And so comedy, tragedy, right, and irony. And we don't have much left on the irony or comedic part. We do know that the theater's productions would be done on a hillside with people watching the actors down in the valley of the hill, and hundreds and hundreds of people would show up, and they would spend the better part of a day. And that was considered at that time the length of a theater production would be what you could get done that could be presented on the hillside by a group of actors. Plato thought that theater was very, very dangerous and wanted to squash it out because it excited the emotions of the people, and therefore they'd be hard to control politically. Aristotle didn't really agree with that notion, and he wanted the more cathartic things to happen and to process things with the audience so that they went away not having that pain in them, but through what the actors did on the stage, certain things were resolved, unfolded, or the bad guy got in the end, or the good guy got the girl, whatever it was supposed to be. But in tragedy, the good guy never gets the girl, and the good guy never gets the fortune. It's the loss of fortune that makes it a tragedy in the first place. So anyway, those are some distinctions about the heroic ethos, sealed by fate in a lot of these. And you can have a martyr, you can have a lone wolf, for example. You can, in our coaching thing, we look at empathizing or sympathizing, and you sympathize with the hero who's lost everything, lost their fortune, lost their possibility of finding their true love, or find out that they're, all those Shakespearean things that happen in tragedy, very, very dark. So the character is that which reveals a moral purpose. That's Poetics number 6, part 6, showing what kind of things man or woman chooses or avoids. So I think it's very, very, although I disagree with plots being linear, I do like his development of character and some of the implications of that in modern times. There's some divergence between what I've been doing in my work. I'm considered one of the top 3 organizational storytelling scholars in the world, and number 1 retired and she passed away, which is Barbara Sanowska from Sweden. I'm technically, I guess, by citation counts, number 2 in my books and articles, and Johannes Gabriel would be a close third. But he's quite an eloquent writer and really, really gifted, etc. So anyway, if we look at divergences between what I'm doing and Aristotle sees character as consistent with their essence. So you have an essence of the character, an essence, and the character acts out of their essence. We see it possible to restory a character and for them to find a new story or new identity for themselves. Aristotle's ethos often culminates in a moral judgment. And here in Perview, we're empathetic and understanding, but we want them not to be the result of their fate and to have choices and opportunities. But then we're not selling a movie either. We're not selling theater on the hillside. So there is a difference there. One of the nice quotes, the characters must be good. There will be an element of character if the choice is morally decisive, even in a small thing. So the thing about it is, he's writing about tragedy. It would have been nice to have more of his material on the comedic, etc., irony. And I'll stop there and see if there's any dialogue, discourse, disagreement, comments. You got an idea, but I wanted to sort of make some of those points. Yeah, so let's go. What have we got going here?
David, thank you. I think one of the things that intrigues me is the question of choices, right? I mean, the choices between an invented character, right? Because I mean, I think the author already knows where he or she wants to go with this, right? So if I want a villain, of course there are going to be certain choices, and the choices get made for you. But then I'm thinking about in real life, I feel like, sometimes it's clear that something is a choice. Do I go down the street to the left or do I go down to the right? But I think in life, right, is it always so clear that something even is a choice? Because, we just do things, right? And isn't that what, David, in your coaching, right? You only see one way, that's the filter, so, I mean, where you don't even see choices, and I think where we don't even, in real life, we're not even aware. I didn't even see I had a choice here. You just do things. And, that is the point I wanted to make, the point of choice. We're not always aware that we have them.
That's true. And the audience is seeing that this character had choices, but then they found out they found out that they were in a relationship with their mother and they didn't know it was the mother, and all these crazy things happen, and you have such pity and sorrow for the characters, but that makes it a tragedy, and people love a tragedy. I personally, I watch the Hallmark Channel. I like my romances, I think you're going to say something.
Can I ask a question or make a comment? When you said that Aristotle sees it coming from the essence, I think that's what you said, right? And so I wonder if the tragedies, and that through restoring, I guess, it says our essence can change or we're disproving that it comes from our essence. I think now what we know about what's held in the unconscious mind, it's really clearly not the essence, but that once we heal all of that, then perhaps we're tapping into our essence. Is that
Oh, yeah.
Fair?
Well, essence would be the kind of the vibrant matter of the being. And for Aristotle, those were fixed. You're
Got it.
born and you
Okay.
have a character. And as you grow older, you still have the essence of that character. So if you're acting out as a child, you're acting out as an adult, you're acting out as an elder. But in our world, we leave it open that a person can actually change their character over time.
And does that imply their essence is changing then, I think?
Yes, and Aristotle would not like that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
My sense of it. Betty, did I get that right or wrong?
yeah. I can't help but say that Sartre would applaud you, David, because his whole point with existentialism is that we're not just a blob, which he equated essence with. But I think that Aristotle can be defended a bit if we elevate what an essence is to something that's within us that describes us no matter how we change. Because when you restory, what elements you're restoring not everyone would agree. Now, I have a big problem when people from so long ago try to talk about heroic essence and choices of heroes. They mean half of humanity. They cannot mean the women who did not have the same choices. And I feel like shouting because when we talk about getting the girl or not, she's part of these possessions he might get or lose. She is the object in this story necessarily. So how can I even begin to worry about essence when that wasn't even part of the question at the time? Ulysses he might have added a woman to a story just for variety or diversion, but she would never be the one who we would look at as making choices or not making choices, having an essence that's restoried or not restoried. And so I feel very privileged that today adding men and women to the mix is at least headed in the right direction. We still think in terms of the man being the mover and shaker, but we're not totally beside the idea that there might be, that women would pose the same question. It was a little bit long, but I realize that essence is a great question for anybody who does have moral choices and everything. But back then, in Greek times, Aristotle probably would have laughed in our faces if he heard this conversation.
I'm sure he would.
Yeah.
Sold a lot more books than I ever would have, you know. But but yay, women, you know. It's in the writing of the time, they just said he, and the heroes. They didn't give women the same thing. Now Shakespeare does, you know, and some of the things, some of his plays does that, but
David, you just raised an interesting point. Shakespeare's genius was that he didn't just ask about heroic choices and all this. He brought up storylines that allowed women to join in the question.
Merchant of Venice, he's a classic, you know. She's a woman you can identify with, you know. But she has to pretend to be a man to get her point across, you know, even in times.
Can I just comment, David, you said about not having the comedic or the, you know, lighter version. I'm hearing that they found thousands of manuscripts under the Vatican. So I think we're going to be surprised.
That would be cool.
We get. I'll try to find something and share a link for you guys.
Yeah, maybe Aristotle was a bit too comedic with the papal stuff, and they had to hide everything. Yeah, that could be. Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, in one sense, it's kind of the go-to model for movie making. You know, to have the beginning, the middle with the climax, the end, the denouement, explaining how it all fits together in a detective show or a romance or adventure. So it's been a very dominant emplotment approach for a long, long time. I think people are saying they don't see that it's hierarchical. You can arrange the elements any way you want in books and movies and life. But it's certainly been a part of my career. It's been like you had to, this is coloring in the lines, that's Aristotle. Coloring out of the lines, that's Boji. He keeps coloring out of the lines. What's he doing? Anyway, so
I'm right with you.
But I remember, from one of the sessions about the coaching, right? That one of the question was, what was your life like before? So, but there are certain, even in a life, there are certain points, right? Certain landmark points, like, oh, before this or that, like a life-changing thing, right? That you're trying, that when you have trauma, I remember when you talked about the trauma situation, what was your life like before that happens, so how does that, how do these pivotal points in a life, how does that relate to beginning, middle, end, would you say?
Oh,
Because I think there are these points, right? After I had that injury, or after I did, after somebody passed away, or all of these things that are these cutting points.
well, I think in those of us who were trained in public high schools and we had bad English teachers that taught us that every story would have a beginning, middle, and end, and you must have a thesis statement, and you must do the rising action and have a climax and the falling action and the denouement. Yeah, that's been the training in America for a long, long time. And I think my sense is, having gotten some education in France, that it's a bit more focused on the character, in Italy too, on the character development, and less on a strictly linear plot, or a plot that curves like a Joseph Campbell heroic journey. So, I'm critical of all these popular approaches of Aristotle and Joseph Campbell, and but if you want to make your mark in the world, you gotta go where the edge is, So, yeah.
David, you were, I just want to reinforce what you said. You were really one of the first who I read that talked about beginning, middle, and end being just one possibility, that it was rarely rarely linear. And before that, I pretty much only read that everything was linear.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Tom's Lemke. If you let me draw you into the conversation, Tom, and feel free to say no. But I'm thinking of that marvelous organizations we once had of Sears. We also had Kmart. For a while we had Kmart and Sears together. But it seems like they had an essence to them that were crafted by not only the founders, but people that were successors for a long, long time, and then lost their way. They just lost the plot. The plot got lost. Like, this is how you make a business work, or this is how you bring in customers, and this is how you provide value. And I know, Tom, you said that they brought in some executives from other organizations that had a very different philosophy than the founders of Kmart. And I think that's true in Sears too. That guy that sold Sears and Roebuck, I don't think Roebuck lasted long, but there was a guy named Sears, and he did sell out of cattle. He did sell watches on trains. And then from that, he developed catalogs, and then catalogs was the mainstay. And then they had big box stores, but they were focused on clothing and appliances and tools that you could take back and get a full warranty on. I don't know. Do you remember the day, Tom? I'm nostalgic for the day in which, my drill, for example, yesterday, my power drill that I bought at Harbor Freight, like the whole bottom of it split, and I had to glue it back on, Anyway, I don't know if you know about drills.
Not built by Craftsman Tools, obviously, which would last forever. It's interesting because one day I ran into one of the former chairman of Kmart in one of the stores, and he said the greatest mistake he ever made in his career, and he became chairman. He started as a stock boy and ended up as chairman of the board. So he's one of those stories that you hear about in business. He said the biggest mistake he made was underestimating Walmart. He was so confident that no one would ever catch Kmart. So that was number one. He misjudged what they were doing, what they were capable of, because Walmart started building in small towns and slowly taking pieces of the market away that weren't necessarily visible to somebody like Kmart that had 2,500 stores at the time. And the second thing he said was that he failed to realize how important the investment in technology was. So Walmart was investing heavily in technology. Kmart was dealing with all these legacy systems that had been in place for years, and there were just complexities in the systems where the apparel system wouldn't ring in the same registers that the non-apparel system rang because they bought an apparel technology. So trying to integrate those two technologies was a huge cost that they decided we'll just sort of jury-rig this thing together and make the best of it, where Walmart built stuff from ground zero with the technology and still does to this day. So they're very technologically oriented companies. So anyway.
Oh, yeah. I was a big fan of Sears when I earlier in my career, 30, 40 years ago. The Sears was the go-to company. That wasn't a Walmart that was their ideal. It was Sears that had quality, service, commitment. Everybody would go the extra mile. And I remember going into a Sears here before they closed in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and you couldn't get service, and nobody was paying attention to you, and you couldn't return things well. And I grew up, and my mother would want the washing machine fixed, Maytag or something, and I would take it apart and say, "Oh, this looks bad," and I get a schematic from Sears, and they identify the part number. I'd order it, $10. I'd get her washing machine or a dryer fixed again. Same with the TVs, the Westinghouse TVs. I could fix those. Anyway,
I was remembering the old Sears catalogs. You could buy homes. You could buy a kit home. You could also buy heroin at one point.
So
oh my God.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've seen the ads. Yeah, but that was a long time ago. But
get your Coca-Cola with Coke and your heroin right here at Sears. So wow.
When did that start? My guess is like late 1800s, probably somewhere in there.
Yeah, late 1800s, early 1900s, when they really got going, because the whole catalog phenomena came along and a lot of companies grew from that. One time I actually met Sam Walton because when I was living in Chicago, he was opening a new store. And there was Sam standing at the door when customers would leave, and he would say, "Hi, I'm Sam Walton. This is my company. Did you find everything you wanted to buy? And is there anything I should be carrying in this store that you didn't find today?" And he literally would ask dozens and thousands of customers as he went around to new stores. And that's how he learned. He didn't study the market mapping and things that were going on at Wall Street. He literally went out and stood at the door to store and asked people, "What should I add?" It's very interesting. Yeah. And to this day, if you go down to Walmart, it's like Sam is still alive, because everywhere you go in a building, there's signs on the wall that say, "Sam says this," and then they have some quote from Sam. It's like he's still in the building, walking around and making comments.
Yeah, I did an article on that. Did an article on Grace Ann and I did one on Sam Walton, the ghost of Sam Walton. how he lives on after he's dead in Walmart, and also the protesters against Walmart, that anti-sweatshop movement, for example. They said Walt's turn on his grave, he would never go for this lack of value or forcing small business people out of their business to get a lower price. But Sam was interesting. He would know the names of all the store managers and the salespeople. At each store. He was very person oriented, and he didn't let his vice presidents. He didn't have many of them to begin with, but they wanted to hyper automate everything. He goes, no, we're going to wait. We're not going to invest in that. So he kept.
He watched other people, and then he copied the best. He didn't jump in first, but he became the best by waiting for the second innovation to come out.
Yeah.
I think tariffs are going to affect Walmart.
I would imagine it. Well, Sears is gone. But so this has been a Thinkman's Circle, and we've gone in the circle around Aristotle. We've looped around him. We've tied him up, put him in a noose, and dragged him with a horse. So, I mean, hope you'll give with us next time when Paul Baines will give us about language, and hopefully Sabine will come back and give us another rendition on Aristotle. And after that, we have Olivia who's going to do whatever she wants. So that's the end.